In the late 5th century AD, the world had been turned upside down. The glorious empires of Europe, Asia, and the smaller kingdoms in between were almost destroyed, all thanks to one people, today known as the Huns. Historians are confident that the Huns came from somewhere in Central Asia, yet little else is known about their people. This is due to the destruction they brought upon those they conquered being so great, very few were left to tell the tale. Many things about them today are considered romanticized or even fabricated. What we do know about them comes from the outsiders who survived their wrath. Welcome to our very first video on the channel covering the Hunnic campaign in Europe and the Battle of the Utus River. Undisputedly, the most famous of these people was known as Attila. He was so terrifying in his ability to conquer, he was known to the Romans as the Scourge of God. Each and every battle he commanded was nothing short of historically decisive, and the manner in which he struck fear into his enemies was simply impressive. The history in his ballad has many interesting characters and events that changed history forever. One such instance was his contribution to the Germanic migration, and indirectly being one of the many factors which led to the downfall of the Western Roman Empire. His story starts following the death of the Hunnic ruler Rugila, when the vast Hunnic Empire was left to his two nephews, Attila and Bleda. Their rise to power transpired at the same time as the negotiations between the Eastern Roman Empire Theodosius II and the Hunnic Empire were taking place. These negotiations concerned the return of several traitorous Hunnic nobles who fled to the Roman Empire following the brothers' ascensions. Taking advantage of the situation, the brothers managed to come to an agreement that was heavily in their favor, known as the Margus Treaty, in which the Romans would return the fugitives in addition to doubling their tribute of 350 pounds of Roman gold. The treaty also ensured the opening of Roman markets in the east to Hunnic traders, as well as obtaining a deal of 8 soldi for each individual Roman soldier returned from previous conflicts. Following the treaty, the Huns decided to test their luck against the Sassanids. Not much is known about this invasion. However, it is certain that the Sasanian army managed to repel the Hunnic invasion force. In the year 440, the Huns returned, crossing the Danube and raiding large cities and small towns alike. However, the response by Theodosius II was put on hold, as the Eastern Romans had their attention diverted by Gaiseric, king of the Vandals. The Germanic tribe had just captured the city of Carthage and the rest of Roman Africa with it in order to form a unified Vandal kingdom. Since this area was the breadbasket for the Western Roman Empire, the West, already suffering many wounds, was heavily injured by this event. Attempting to help his ally in the West, Emperor Theodosius II was prompted to send his forces in the Balkans to the island of Sicily, as the Vandals had now moved to capture the city of Syracuse. This action by the emperor was a colossal oversight, as it left the Balkans exposed to Hunnic invasion. Taking advantage of the lack of troops and fortifications in the Balkans, Attila and Bleda managed to take Singidunum and Sirmium in the year 441. The next year, after realizing his mistake and believing he could defeat the Huns, Theodosius recalled his troops from Sicily in order to face them, while also ignoring any demands made by the Hunnic kings. In 443, the Huns responded to this by launching another campaign where they took the cities of Serdica, Philippopolis, and Arcadiopolis, making it all the way to Constantinople, where the Huns utterly destroyed a defending Roman army. It's most likely Attila planned to siege the city, but upon realizing the extent of Constantinople's walls, the Huns turned back, defeating a second Roman army near Callipolis. Realizing there was no way to defeat Attila, Theodosius accepted the demands of the Huns, and the tribute was raised from the earlier 350 pounds settled on in Margus to 2,100 Roman pounds of gold, in addition to Theodosius handing over an initial 6,000 pounds, and the ransom price for captured Roman prisoners rising to 12 solidi instead of 8. After this, the Huns withdrew back across the Danube. However, unexpectedly, the peaceful withdrawal was not without its casualties, as during this, Bleda died due to unknown circumstances. It's widely suspected that Attila possibly had his brother murdered in order to become the sole ruler of the Huns. In 447, Attila returned yet again to the Roman lands beyond his side of the Danube, after Theodosius stopped paying the tribute upon hearing of this encroachment. Not sitting idly by, the Magister Militum, a man by the name of Arnagisculus, who was of Gothic origin, amassed a large army consisting of soldiers from armies of Illyricum, Thrace, and the emperor's own personal troops, in order to confront them. The two armies met on the banks of the Utus River. Although we know very little about the battle, as no first-hand source exists, there are several theoretical scenarios that describe the battle in detail. One of these scenarios states that the Roman army numbered roughly 25,000 soldiers, and that Attila's army was of similar size. Attila's army had most of its composition being skirmishers, with sections of horse archers that could quickly run across the battlefield. The Romans did not have a counter to these swift troops, with the large bulk of their army being heavily armored infantry. Though these units were effective in combat, their inability to be mobile, being weighed down by the armor, made them easy targets for the horse archers of the Huns. The Roman army was under the command of Arnagisculus, who put the other minor generals, Artabes and Zondalas, on the left and the right flank respectively. The Roman left was positioned next to a villa and the right against the Utus river bank. Zondalas had with him a strong cavalry wing on the right side of the Roman army, employing the use of heavily armored horsemen known as cataphracts. He also had with him several cavalry contingents pulled from various Visigoth and Dalmatian settlements in the west. The Hunnic army was commanded by Attila, who placed himself behind the center line across the field from Arnagisculus. The Hunnic commanders Bericus and Elac commanded the left flank, and Denizagek and Ernake on the right. Bericus and Elac, across from Zondalas and his cavalry line, had many Ostrogothic horsemen aiding them to counter the heavy Roman cataphracts. Despite the better positioning, the Romans decided to make their move first. This was a smart decision by Arnagisculus, who realized a stagnant defense would do little to combat the very mobile Hunnic horsemen. Pushing his entire army forward, Arnagisculus gave word to Zondalas to charge ahead into the Hunnic left, hoping the heavy cavalry would decimate their lighter horsemen, allowing him to flank and encircle Attila in the center. Bericus, however, was not inexperienced and pulled back with his much quicker cavalry units. Seeing this, Attila shifted to the left, making the cataphracts attack his center head-on. The cataphracts inflicted extensive damage in their charge, even wounding Attila himself and causing massive casualties to the center. Despite this, the strength of the cataphracts waned, as after their initial charge they were quickly encircled, trapped, and killed by the Huns. As Bericus made his way back forward, seeing that he was no longer in danger, the Hunnic right flank fired arrows on the Roman left. This initiated a mass panic amongst the Romans in this flank, causing them to huddle together and causing a few to flee. Some of the Dalmatian cavalry that charged with Zondalas had made it away from the Hunnic encirclement and were being chased down by the returning left flank of the Huns. This prompted Arnagisculus to move the entire army forward, making the Huns retreat away from the returning Dalmatians, yet causing the Roman left to become uncoordinated under arrow fire, depleting their numbers significantly. Arnagisculus pushed directly into the Hunnic center, with his flanks following suit, creating an ensuing brawl. The Huns, though with lesser footmen, managed to tire out the better-equipped Romans by putting their light troops in the front and their more experienced and armored troops in the back. Once the Romans had fought off those in the front, their heavy armor tired them, making them no match for the Hunnic second line. The flanks did not fare any better for Arnagisculus, as from his horse, he watched the Dalmatian cavalrymen he saved earlier be ripped to shreds by the Hunnic horse archers. It was roughly at this point that while trying to restore the morale of his army, an arrow struck his horse, making him tumble to the ground. Not wasting a moment, he got up and charged into battle. The Hunnic left flank, now having nothing to oppose them, encircled the Romans completely with the same horse archers that had ended the Dalmatian advance. Arnagisculus and his army would go on to make their last stand until their bodies gave out from exhaustion, and the Huns massacred them where they stood. A crushing blow to the empire, as an expert general, along with several veteran soldiers, were wiped from the earth just 150 miles from the capital city, which for an army is just a week's march. However, the Huns did not go directly to Constantinople, and took a much more sinister and methodical approach, going out of their way to loot every place they could. The area around Constantinople was for the most part unguarded, and according to the historian Callinicus, over 100 towns were destroyed by the Huns on their way there. Besides, Attila had received word that the walls of the city were in awful shape from an earthquake that had happened some time prior. In the aftermath of the battle, the Roman army had been all but decimated, and the Huns likewise took heavy losses as well. With the Roman army defeated, the Huns would make their way to Constantinople again for the second time, destroying the city of Marcianopolis while they marched on by. The walls of Constantinople had stood in the way of Attila last time, and now being damaged from an earthquake, Attila did not want to let this chance go to waste. When he arrived, however, he was disappointed to find that the walls of the city had been repaired. After Attila's reign of terror deep into Eastern Roman territory, he turned his eyes westward. Deciding now to focus his attention on Gaul and northern Italy, he quickly crossed back to the other side of the Danube and marched his troops through Central Europe. Arriving sometime later, he harassed the forces of the now decrepit Western Roman Empire. The hierarchs consolidated on what to do, sending more and more reinforcements to no avail. Though they knew of Attila's great feats, they could not afford to face him with their full strength. Civil war ravaged southern Gaul and much of the Iberian Peninsula. Generals were pitted against each other instead of their own common enemy. Only in 451, during the rule of Valentinian III, did the most prominent general of Western Rome, Flavius Aetius, manage to force back Attila at the Battle of the Catalonian Plains. However, Attila was not totally out of the hair of the West, sacking the city of Aquileia in northern Italy just a year later. It should be noted when discussing the subject of the Hunnic conquest that despite their reputation, the Huns were not extraordinarily special in and of themselves, but rather because they exploited a rough period of the empire's lifespan. The most important things the Huns took advantage of is firstly the empire's crumbling political structure, and secondly the empire's inability to adopt new tactics. Just 200 years prior, the Romans were lauded for their political stability and their adoption of new tactics and weaponry as they encountered new threats. Had Attila faced them during this time, it is most likely that he would not have been able to put such a large dent in the empire, as their power was substantially greater than what it was during his time. When the Romans and their Germanic vassals fought with equipment properly suited to the battle, and they had enough cavalry to face off against the horsemen of the Hunnic army, the fight was evenly matched. The Battle of the Utus highlights the failures of the Roman military design, and their inability to respond timely with enough change brought them many more years of raids from these invaders. Attila, in the end, took a break from war and returned from Italy, relishing in his fortunate spoils at Rome's expense. Just a few months after he left the campaign in the west, he suddenly died. Although it is not confirmed how he died, the historian Priscus recounts that he had been celebrating at a feast, eating and drinking throughout the night. During the celebrations, he somehow suffered a trauma that caused blood to come out of his mouth and nose. He would later go on to die from shock, from how much blood he lost during the event. As the news spread across Europe, so did hope of an imperial restoration. The sons of Attila, who were eager to claim the realm of their now-deceased father, destroyed it with their internal conflicts between one another. For the Romans, a new emperor of the West, who had watched the hardships brought by Attila befall his people, was crowned. Julius Valerius Majorianus, known to us today as simply Emperor Majorian, would now begin his ambitious and electrifying plan to return Rome to its former glory.